right, and welcome back to the Prometheus Afterthoughts podcast, the podcast where we typically talk to the most recent boot, but in this instance, we're going to be talking to the winner of Prometheus Season of the Elders, Aaron. Aaron, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you doing, Casey?
I am doing okay. So let's get down to it. So this is your time to talk about anything you want. We could talk about stuff discussed in the podcast, the show itself, the reunion, because obviously we only really asked you guys like a question or two. But yeah, now is your time to speak your piece. And I know you definitely had some frustrations about some of the sticks as the episodes are airing. So I'm very curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, it's definitely very interesting to watch yourself on screen and to understand how other people are viewing you. I think I knew while I was playing, like obviously it was pretty clear that people like didn't think I was doing a lot. They thought I was under the radar, but there were various points where I felt like I was doing a lot because it was I don't know. I'm not a very out there player, so I think I messaged you about the that first vote after we came together, and so I don't know why my camera went funny. Hold on.
I think this is the moment where you smack your webcam,
Yes, I
right?
smack my camera. Let me try turning it on. The thing that Antonio told me to do, which was put my hand in front of the camera, never works, but turning it on and back up.
That usually works for me because sometimes, especially with this mic being in the foreground, it'll like focus on the mic instead of me. So usually if I just go like that, it'll like refocus.
Yeah, I don't even know. I felt like I was not. Sometimes I wave my hands around, and that's what the problem is. Felt like I was keeping it together there. Um, anyway, so I was talking about there were certain times when it was a little frustrating to watch, and it was interesting to see the way that other people viewed me because it's different than I guess how I view myself. One example of it was during that first merge temple that we went to, and there was all the conversation, and I right before that had ended up in a room with just Tracy, and Tracy and I had said to each other, we're going to vote for Ben. And then as the ceremony was going on, it became very clear to me that no one else was voting for Ben and that Louise was going to be the vote. And I knew that it was important for my game that all of Guyane voted together, at least for those first few rounds. And so I was like, I don't know, because I knew that Tracy was, newer to the game. I was like, I'm not sure if Tracy is picking up on the fact that like clearly the vote is shifting to Louise. And so I like threw myself out there and was like, I was just talking to someone at the end, and the thing that I said that I was going to do, I'm not going to do that because it's pretty clear there's something else going on. And like to me, that was like, oh my gosh, this is way more out there than I want to be playing. But the reaction to it still was like, Aaron's not doing anything. Why is Aaron so under the radar? I guess that's good.
Yeah, which is very interesting. I mean, like, you play, you see a lot of these games on TV, you play a lot of these games just in general, and you're bound to come across people that just aren't naturally out there. They're not now naturally outspoken. I mean, not everybody could be, the Bloodies and the Antonios of the world. But like we obviously see in their case that like didn't work out for them. They're not the winner of season 2. But no offense, Antonio or Bloody. But the thing is it's a matter of, in my opinion, it's a matter of playing to you. You need to play, like, if I'm making sense, you need to, if you know yourself and how you are, you need to play to your strengths. And we do see that, like, while you guys are all in different degrees of it, like you, Michael, and CJ are not the outspoken players. Mm-hmm. And, so it's really cool. And I was loving it. And I know a number of the other production members were loving it when this was airing, or when we were filming it. But it's really cool to see like 3 under the radar players make it to the end. And, you all play to your strengths. And obviously you, in the eyes of many of the audience and some of production and the jury, like you had the winning game. You stuck to your guns and you popped out when you needed to. And, we always bring up the bloody vote, but obviously that was a huge moment in the show. So yeah, it's just a matter of playing to your strengths, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that too. That I like I know that I can't be the out there person because that's just not who I am. But it's also really interesting because I am finding as I play more of these games that people assume because I'm not out there that either I'm like not doing anything or that I'm going to be a pushover. And like just because I'm not super loud does not mean that you can push me around. And I think that I got to like show a little bit of that in the Ascension ceremony when like Ben had his whole thing and then he was done. And I was like, actually, can I say something? I have thoughts about what you just said.
Yeah. And I mean, luckily too, it obviously that worked in your favor. And luckily, Ben was not as bitter as some other people because he could have just said no and muted
Yeah.
you. So it was nice that you had pushed out there to say something and be able to defend yourself. But it's interesting. You can't cater to necessarily everybody, but you were able to hit three. And in this case, that was the majority given there was a split. Still incredibly like I still cannot believe season two ended the way it did. Three under the radar players with such a close vote, which is just insane.
Yeah.
So something else I wanted to touch upon, and we kind of mentioned it at the reunion show, is that like, there were instances where you were watching it back at home, like throwing stuff at your TV. So I didn't know if you wanted to speak specifically on what was making you angry in those instances.
Yeah, one of the ones that I thought of was when so it was the bloody vote and they were talking about the bloody vote and everyone just was like, okay, well, it must have been Antonio. And I was like, I mean, that's like when it happened. I think that's fair. That's how Antonio was playing. But then Antonio gets to the sticks, and Antonio's like, well, no, it was Aaron. Like Aaron came to me and said this. And Louise is like, well, yeah, but probably somebody else told her to do that. And it happened one more time before that too, when I think it was when one person voted. Oh, when Antonio got out. I guess it was after that. When
Yeah, because
Antonio
it was
got
Bloody and
voted,
Louise that originally had that conversation.
yeah, and then when Antonio got voted out and one person voted with him and it was Jocelyn, they were like, "Oh, well, it was probably Aaron that like didn't know what was going on." And I was like, "I'm not an idiot, guys. Like even if I'm under the radar, like I know what's going on. I'm having conversations."
Yeah. I mean, but that is the crazy thing. It's that perception in the game. That perception does become people's realities. And sometimes for some people, it's so hard to convince them otherwise, because like, and I'm not necessarily saying yours was a situation of too little too late, but for some people it is a situation of too little too late. But it's also really funny because if you're a fan of Survivor, like how many times do we have winners that literally pop their head up in the final stages of the game and end up winning it all? Like even though this person was a winner, I always go back and I think of in Millennials versus Gen X, you have David, who was scared of the world when he was out there. But then, like, literally in the last leg of the game, like, he completely transformed. He took control of the game and almost won it all had he not been literally taken out right before the end. But yeah, it's just very interesting. There's a lot of people that do pop their head out at the end of the game. And you know what? On a lot of instances, that really is especially if you are an under the radar player, especially if you are not a louder personality, you focus on getting the louder personalities out. You just kind of boom, 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 eliminate them. And then you're right there at the end. And as long as you can explain your game, you win.
Yeah, well, it's funny that you bring up millennials versus Gen X because I actually think that I had like a philosophy the way that Adam Klein played that game because he talked about at the end, he talked about like, I wasn't the best player, but I got out the best players so that I was the best player at the end. And that was very much how I was thinking about it. I was like, I know that I can't beat Bloody. I know that I can't beat Antonio. And I set myself up to be able to make sure that I wasn't at the end with them.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, once again, it's absolutely amazing. Which I want to actually speak on something towards the end of the game too. We now granted it was not as close as it was shown that it was in the edit, but it actually wasn't all too far off. You ended up like really struggling. I was almost afraid Andrew being your moderator for the final challenge, and it almost got to an instance of you not being able to solve the slide puzzle. What was your thoughts and feelings? Like, what was going on? Have you ever done like were you used to doing slide puzzles?
Yeah, I'm not good at them though, and I like tried to practice them, but whenever I've practiced them, they had the numbers. So that one, so my brain just like doesn't really work in that way. I'm actually really good at jigsaw puzzles, but I made the decision, like I know that slide puzzles are faster, and I know that there's a trick to them, and I know what the trick is. I just like had a hard time like actually making it happen. I don't know how much on the cutting room floor you have of me just like talking into the abyss the whole time. We're just like panicking. I think I did say to Andrew, like after I finished it, I can't remember if I said it to him on camera or if I like messaged him afterwards that I was afraid that like that he would like had cursed me. I was like, oh no, I love Andrew, but I was like, oh no, this is not the room I want to be in.
Yeah, he was. I can specifically remember when we were filming that challenge, he was rooting you on hardcore, which was so nice. But yeah, just a little funny tidbit I wanted to touch upon. Another thing, and we've kind of already talked about it before. But going back to that first vote in episode 6, you had messaged me after you had seen episode 6, and I should have actually wrote down what you originally said to me, but it's something along the lines of like, it's interesting, when you think about these, these moments or these games, you kind of tend to think about them as you're the hero of your own story, but like watching that episode back, it was not as I like perceived it at all. Were there other instances of that throughout the season?
I can't think. I think that was the big one where, yeah, like we talked about, where I felt like I was like so out in front, but like everyone else was like, oh yeah, that was like definitely like Bloody and Louise, and then Jenny getting in there, and I was like, oh, okay, well, like that's good. I like felt like I was way more out there than I actually was. Um, I don't think that there were any other instances where I felt like that I was necessarily the one that had the wrong perception because there was so much of it where like people were just saying I wasn't doing anything and I knew that I was doing things, so there wasn't as much where I don't think there was as much where I had in my head like, oh yeah, I was doing all of this stuff and then saw it on screen and realized that I wasn't.
Yeah. We also have, there was plenty of instances where you and Michael were messaging me thinking that CJ had won. But we also had a number of our podcasts, co-hosts come on that were, deeming you as the winner. And we had one as early as Tiki after episode 5, thinking that you were going to win. What did you think about those moments?
It was really cool because that's one of the things about being an under the radar player is that like you're usually not a fan favorite, you're not anybody's winner pick, and so it was cool to see that there were people that like were seeing the sparks of my game and were seeing the things that I was doing.
Yeah. So it is really cool. I mean, you positioned yourself socially really well. I mean, you might not have, as we've said before, because you were under the radar, you might not have been leading the charge the whole game, but once again, it's those types of people that got themselves out for being in that position. We even see that in season 1. You end up being this loud force. Although ironically, that we did have someone who was loud that ended up winning season 1, but everyone else ended up getting out for that exact reason. But do you have any other thoughts, in regards to your edit, the experience of playing the game, the podcast, anything like that before we conclude?
Um, so I thought when you're talking about season 1, there was in the original edit of the premiere, you had a confessional from me where I talk about how I wanted to play like Caro, except get to the end and win. And so it did not make the final episode that went out on YouTube, but I think that I did that. I was able to be social like she was and just able to get the votes at the end. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah,
Um,
when oh, sorry, good.
Oh, I was like really like reading into the fact that it didn't make the final cut. I was like, does this mean I did win? Does this mean I didn't win? For some reason I thought I was like, I'm gonna because something that I don't know if viewers would realize this, but I don't think anyone of me, CJ, and Michael, I don't think any of us were sure who won. Like, I feel like normally you play games like this and you like kind of have a sense of what jury votes that you're getting. But like couldn't figure out a way in my head to make it work because I kind of thought that I had the three that I did get. But I was like, but I think CJ got the other three, like the three original Aaron of Jenny, Ben, and Louise. It's like I'm pretty sure that Michael got Tracy, but there's no way that it was a tie because they would have like you would have had to resolve that on the day of. And so I was just really I think you can see it in the reunion. I really was very surprised. I was like bracing myself to not be the one that won. So it was very surprising.
Yeah, I think Michael was even surprised he got 2 votes. But yeah, I wanted to actually go back to that edit. There's like a number of instances when I wanted to actually bring this up, but I guess this is actually the perfect time to bring it up now that the season's over, and this will air as the final podcast of the season. But so yeah, in the original edit, which I have an issue of like I have an issue of editing things, then hating it, then editing it again and editing it again. And that premiere, I must have edited like a million different times after it was finished. But the one thing I originally wanted to do was have a number of hints in the opening that you were the winner. So the original idea was to have 3 normal shots of our final 3, you, CJ, and Michael. But unfortunately, Michael was really busy at the time and couldn't submit, so we had Jocelyn submit. So just you and Michael. So that was our first hint. Our second hint was when we talk about strategy in our opening scene, the opening scene ends on the queen piece of the chessboard. That was our second hint. And then the third hint was we had your confessional. You were the only one that yes, you were the only one that originally had a confessional in the premiere, and your confessional, I'm 99% sure, ended with something along the lines of like, I hope to be the next Promethean or something like that. So those were our original 3 hints that you were going to win. But then after gauging your guys' reaction in the premiere, that was one of the things I switched. You can even see too that there's other like small differences if you watch our season 2 sneak peek versus the actual episode 1 that airs. Those intros are different, subtly different, but they're different. So that's always the interesting thing about, watching people's reactions. It was the same thing with the finale. I watched your guys' reaction or saw your guys' reaction in the message, and then we made more edits. But yeah, I mean, very interesting that you read into that. I love it. But
Yeah.
I'm happy that there was a sense of uncertainty because I hope that made it more enjoyable for the 3 of you guys to watch.
It was stressful, but it was good. I somehow in my head I was like, so afterwards, we're like all messaging of like like let's speculate wildly on who got what votes and figure out like who do we think won, what's going on. And we like couldn't figure it out. But in my head I was like, I think as soon as I start seeing the season, right, I'm going to be able to tell like am I getting enough content that I could be the person that won? And I was like, I'm not sure. I don't know. So I think you did a good job of even someone who like very clearly, like I was very much looking out for, am I personally getting content that means that I'm the winner? And it was still a surprise to me. So you did an excellent job.
Yeah, the only person I feel like didn't get a fair amount of content for a while was CJ. And it was just because like a lot of his storylines in the beginning didn't really amount to much. Plus some of his confessionals were unfortunately unusable, just because of like some, audio issues and stuff like that. But I mean, you were like, obviously you had to be introduced at one point because you were an early contender to be out. But I think that also just makes like your story, your story arc over the season even that much more interesting. So, but anyway, do you have any final thoughts before we conclude this?
No, just thank you so much for all of the effort that you put into this, to running this game and editing the episodes. It was so much fun to play. I think Jocelyn said it in her interview that it was a fever dream, and it truly was a fever dream. It was I don't there's like a few scenes of me eating throughout the thing. You can see me like snacking on stuff, but I like barely ate the 2 days, and then I would like get to the end of the day and be like, oh my gosh, I haven't eaten all day. What have I been doing? But it was just so much fun to play, and it has been really fun getting to know the cast even more as we have our group chat as we're all watching the episodes together. It just has been an incredible experience, and I'm so happy that I was a part of it.
Well, we're happy to have you as our second winner of Prometheus. And then before we do conclude, we will have your pop on its way. It's currently in the process of being made. So
Yay.
whenever that gets shipped to you, which we're going to need your address, obviously, send us a picture, Erin aside her pop. So, but yeah, on that note, everyone, thank you for tuning in. Erin, thank you for coming on. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And on that note, be on the lookout for season 3. Have a good
Yay.
night.